So, considering what's happening now, the standoff against civil society and government, what's your take on it as an analyst?
So there does appear to be a standoff between civil society organizations and the politicians who are on stage. You can feel the tension, you can hear it behind me, it's very palpable. I have two reflections on that. The first is, tension is not inherently bad. When you are trying to solve for a deep social malaise, like rape culture and femicide, misogynoir, then there will be tension because these are real survivors and people who work with survivors who carry that trauma at a deep cellular level and at a psychological level into the venue. You can't have a conversation as if you are in a university seminar. So the tension reflects the very harm that comes with being a survivor. So I'm not comfortable with the discomfort. You have to understand the genesis of the discomfort. But the second reflection I have is that from a moral point of view, civil society is justified. And here's the reason. The state government has a monopoly on force, collecting taxes, and acting legislation. None of the activists here are in charge of the police and the SANDF. None of the activists here in law can collect taxes. None of them can pass laws and policies. So because the government has a legal and political mandate to keep us safe, to collect money from us and disperse it for the right purposes, and to enact laws and policies to improve relationships between us. You can't talk about an equality of power between civil society and the state. The state has enormous constitutional powers and duties, which is why it's appropriate for them to be held accountable.
One would maybe say this is the beginning of a journey. Is all of this necessary at this particular stage because everyone is kind of trying to find their feet within the gender-based violence space? No need for us to fight, no need for us to have this antagonism going on. Why not work together? Do you think that is possible?
There is the Minister of Health.
I do not think that differences have to be intractable, even though there's a minister behind me that has just been called the Minister of Health from one of the activists. But I really think that, let me put it this way, it's easier said than done if you're not in government. Right? But take, for example, the Speaker of Parliament. She's got a lot of political skeletons. But the way she engaged the activists, she immediately used her EQ to connect on an emotional issue that's off the agenda, the incarceration of women, how women are treated in our prisons. So we don't have very savvy politicians. And so it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game and intractable. But what it requires is political leadership. And my view is not neutral because even as a political analyst, we see on the daily in South Africa, going back for most of the last 20 years, how the criminal justice system and the justice sector as a value chain, as a cluster, had been hollowed out and let down ordinary South Africans, mostly black women and children. In that context, you're going to get the tensions that you're hearing behind me. It reflects that reality. Does it have to be intractable and is it impossible to have a toenadering, as we say in Afrikaans? No, you can. But in order to have something approximating a healthier, productive working relationship, you need champions. And those champions, they need to convert their colleagues. And I think what's missing in the South African state is that we don't have enough champions who then can try and be infectious and get some of their colleagues to also be champions. I mean, as a moderator, I asked who unambiguously amongst the ministers on stage support the decriminalization of sex work. Only one put up his hand without hesitation. The rest looked like they were deer's caught in headlights. So that's an example. Now, if you are Ronald, you've got to ask yourself not just how do I get a round of applause from the audience as a young minister, but what can I do to bring my colleagues with me? And I think if we have more of that, then we might have a chance to reduce the tensions. But the tensions are a reflection of civil society frustration with government And government can't claim we can't do it alone every 5 minutes. Because if I have more resources than you, then I must have a disproportionate duty to use my resources more effectively than you can with nothing. And let's be honest, civil society organizations often work on a shoestring budget. So when government talks about we must work together, it's based on a false premise. It's based on the premise that there's an equal distribution of power and resources, which is not the case.
So what's the issue here with the unequalness of power? Is it an issue of priority, that gender-based violence is not as much of a priority, hence they're not as forthcoming with the resources, with the power? They're not, as much as they claim that it's an inclusive process, there's no inclusivity. What is the force behind it? Or is it lack of understanding of what gender-based violence is? What do you think the problem is right now?
You know, we could probably find an accurate answer to the question, why is government tardy on GBVF? I haven't seen that question answered with robust data. I think it's a really good research question. But knowing what we know, living in the same country as we do, we've got a lot of women in cabinet. So it's not only the absence of certain women embodiments in politics. Many of the women who disappointed civil society today are obviously by definition women. So you can't, one answer would be to say, you know, cabinet and the state is dominated by men. However, I think that's nevertheless part of the problem, is patriarchy. Our politics, just like society at large, is deeply patriarchal. And you find that the patriarchal approach to politics, the bodies of women are dispensable politically. They're not seen as a priority. Even though women make up 50 plus 1% of the population, you would have thought that politically it's important to care about the welfare of women, just if you want to perpetuate yourself in power. But I think patriarchy runs so deep that men are willing, in business we see, are willing to lose profit in order to continue dominating women. And in politics, just as in our homes, we would rather forego something material than to respect women, because that's the intrinsic nature of patriarchy. So I think our politics is patriarchal. And just like patriarchy affects the world of work and the domestic sphere, similarly within the political sphere, women's bodies are regarded as politically expendable in a way in which my body as a male is not.
We have conversations about budgeting,
Okay.
and that is why the program is
We can go on about the whole patriarchal
The last section
conversation.
is the one with the clinics. So,
My concern
the
is that
reason
in
why
as much as we talk
explain all
about
of those things
patriarchy,
is that if
we also
we
have men that are victims themselves of gender-based violence. And this is where you come in, you've had an experience, you have that background. So tell us a bit more about it, and then just help us understand the landscape of you entering into the space where it's predominantly women that are victims, ignoring the fact that men are also victims. There's a whole bunch of reasons why men are excluded in the conversation of gender-based violence. But what has been your experience coming into the gender-based violence space?
There are many men who are also victims of rape and intimate partner violence within the queer community. I myself, when I was in primary school, was raped by a cousin of mine who was several years older than me. And if you prepubescent compared to someone who's already midway through high school, developmentally that makes a massive difference, of course. I mean, rape is intrinsically wrong and intrinsically harmful, intrinsically violent. There's something particularly heinous about an undeveloped body being assaulted in that way. And that's what happened to me. But despite that, I think the numbers are important. Right? The numbers are important. The reality is that the majority, by a mile, of perpetrators of rape and murder are men. And the majority of victims and survivors are women. That doesn't mean we must ignore boys and men. And I'll come back to that in a second. But I
Not
don't
reach
think
everyone, but there is such a link where
I
people
don't think
can
men should
do
take
that.
up a disproportionate
So
amount of space
the
as if
responsibility now is to make
GBVF
sure that that link is provided.
affects us
And
equally.
we will
I'm
make
going to
the
use an
information
analogy.
available there outside.
A white
the
person,
clinic. So thank
as
you
an
for that
individual white
information.
person, may be a victim
Yes, please.
of racial bigotry.
Hello.
But
No, thank you very much.
it's empirically a lie to suggest that talking about surviving racism as a white person must be on a national summit agenda next to anti-black racism.
I'm not
The
giving
vast majority of racism in the world is white supremacy that is unleashed against black bodies. And so finding that one person, which would be the white racism example, that is parallel to what I shared on stage today as a male survivor, I thought long before sharing that story, because it's not the typical story. And so on the one hand, you want to give men permission to say, I too have been harmed. On the other hand, we must also be sober about the patterns. The bottom line is, it is mostly women who are raped and murdered. It is women who are bearing the brunt of GBV and patriarchy. And yes, men are affected as well, but the numbers are far lower, and we just got to be sensible about it. The last thing I do want to say, though, is, notwithstanding what I've just said, the reason why men should not be excluded, which is a remark I also made on stage earlier, is because if we are the perpetrators, we need to be leaving the solution space. And I think some of the activists didn't quite internalize my point, with all due respect. Women, in a sense, need to be given a break from dealing with the solution space question. In the same way in which I'm tired as a black man to be called to events to come and give a keynote on racism. You know, where's the white person speaking to other white people about how to eliminate white privilege and the remnants of white supremacy and the history of colonialism and apartheid? It's always the black person who's literate on racism, and it's the same with women. So we shouldn't exclude men, but not because we want to mollycoddle men or we think that men are equally affected as victims, but precisely because in order for the world to be a safer place, men must not be a danger to themselves, to ourselves, and we mustn't be a danger to other women. We must learn how to cry, how to be vulnerable, how to reject the idea that there is a template for how to be a good man in the world, which is absolute bullshit. And so we do need to have spaces where men are speaking to men so that we learn healthier forms of masculinity, which will down the line contribute towards a decline in the stats on GBVF. So that's why men's spaces are important. And eventually we'll drop the entire binary and just talk about how do I raise a decent human being without even referencing male or female. But it is appropriate that there's a disproportionate focus on women and girls and the queer community, sex workers, children, because they are the ones that bear the brunt, 90% plus, of incidences of violence.
So as a South African citizen, what do you hope to do? What do you hope this will achieve, this collectiveness? What do you want to see happen? 10, 15, 20 years from now, what do you want?
I'm a social chess player. I used to play in high school, so I think in terms of strategy and tactics, from a strategy point of view, you need to tackle this both top-down and bottom-up. And then the individual tactics you use to achieve your strategic goal, we can then talk about what that looks like. But strategically, I would say we're never going to reduce GBVF unless we both focus on state-centric interventions, but also community-based bottom-up interventions. And what was missing in my panel composition is that, yes, it was right to disproportionately have ministers on, but I want to know, where are the churches? Where's that pastor that says it is immoral for Eusebius to be queer, and then he gets beaten at the tavern? Churches are a source of power. They need to be in the conversation, for example. What about businesses? Businesses like to paint their buildings in Sandton the rainbow flag during Pride Saturday. What happens the rest of the year? What are the experiences of, especially effeminate queer men, unlike me, who are discriminated against because of how they present? You know, a gay man like me is still treated like an honorary straight person because I've got a butch body. So you got to deal with those issues as well. And the state can't be present in all of those spaces. So we need to hold government responsible for laws, unlocking the budgets, making sure the criminal justice system is victim-centric, the courts don't reinscribe the harms that the victims had already experienced primarily at the beginning of the process when they came in contact with the monster, or ordinary person, not a monster. But at the same time, the work we do at home, at school, in universities, in our dormitories, that is as important, because the cumulative effect of toxic beliefs, attitudes, is what results in those men wanting to have ownership over the bodies of women. And I think focusing on the state this morning was an excellent start, fully justified. But in a sense, I'm also looking forward to seeing how other sources of power and organizations come to the party. Because whatever you have to say to Becky Tyler, to Ronald Lamola, to the Speaker, Minister of Women, Children and People with Disabilities, they're not there at home when I go home to my partner. And so in that sense, you've got to tackle this beast in multiple ways simultaneously. And what I'd like to see coming out of the summit are two things. The state doing what is within its power to do, and which is a constitutional and moral obligation. Better legislation, better policing, training the police to be more sensitive in terms of how they handle complaints in front of them, making sure that the DNA backlog is zero, forensic investigative capacity is improved, decriminalizing sex work. I can't believe sex work has not yet been decriminalized. But those are all legalistic instruments. And as someone who studied law in my undergraduate, I loved it, but I also know the limitations of a legalistic approach to what is a deeply social malaise. The law is not there when I go home drunk from the tavern or from the club. And so what happens at home is going to be a function of what kind of character am I? And there we have to work with the state as non-state actors and ask yourself, as a dad, as an older sibling, as a teacher, as a pastor, as a youth minister, what kind of role model are you, and what kind of values are you helping to instill in young people who are entrusted into your care?